Well, it's my honor to host this discussion with Dr. Henry Kissinger, and as a member of the board of the McCain Institute, to welcome Henry and thank him for agreeing to participate in this virtual 2021 Sedona Forum. Henry and I agreed to capture the spirit of the Sedona Forum, that neither of us would wear a tie this morning. So it's as close as we can get to McCain country. I want to say first how important Henry Kissinger was to John McCain. Really a great source of counsel, advice on foreign policy, and a loyal friend in every way. I was privileged on a couple of occasions to be together with Henry Kissinger and John McCain, one memorable trip overnight across the Atlantic to go to the Munich Security Conference, in which we spoke of many topics. And there was a way in which John and I were enthralled by just hearing Henry's stories of the remarkable privileges that he had to be involved in the making of American foreign policy. Henry's story is a remarkably American story. Immigrated to this country at age 15, his family escaping Nazi Germany, serving in the US military, going to Harvard afterward, achieving great success, becoming a member of the Harvard faculty, then becoming involved in politics, National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under President Nixon and President Ford, but not just the titles, a remarkable series of accomplishments that, in my opinion, make him the most successful, eminent diplomat, statesman of our age. And I'm not just praising a friend, but think about it. He paved the way for the détente with the Soviet Union. He opened discussions with China in 1971 with Zhou Enlai, and then that led with his leadership to the summit between President Nixon and Chairman Mao in 1972, and the opening of relations with China that was formalized later in 1979. He successfully concluded the Paris Peace Conference to end the Vietnam War. And he has continued to be a source of great leadership and counsel, written extensively. So on behalf of Cindy McCain and the entire family and Institute, I thank you, Henry, for being with us. The topic of this year's Sedona Forum is defending democracy, which of course mattered to John. And if I may, I'd like to, and they want us to focus on the pivotal relationship with China, between the US and China. So maybe I'll start with a sort of an obvious open-ended question. You really were the person that began the modern era of relations between the US and China. It still is, in some ways, even more important, a bilateral relationship to manage, to avoid conflict, obviously, if we can, to our mutual benefit. And I wonder if you'd reflect a bit on those historic opening discussions you had that led to the beginning of the US-China relationship, and compared to where we are now, what your goals were then and what our goals should be now.
All I knew about Senator McCain at first was that he was a prisoner in Vietnam, and that he had been a prisoner for many years. And at the end of the Vietnam War, I was in Hanoi to conclude the final negotiations. And the Vietnamese said to me, "You can take Commander McCain home with you on your plane," as a sign of our goodwill. I didn't think it was such a great sign of goodwill that the son of the commander in the Pacific would come home with me on a presidential plane. So in any case, I refused to take it. And I was wondering, in the 4 months that intervened before I finally met him, which was at a White House reception, and John McCain came up to me and said, "Thank you for saving my honor." Well, we became deep friends. And for all the years afterwards, in all the various positions he had until he became senator, I have not known no person similarly dedicated to the importance of America and the lessons he drew from his experiences was conciliation with Vietnam, democracy as an important commitment of the United States, and security and human progress. And he dedicated himself to this. And so to me, he's a great symbol of the best that America can do. And was an honor for me that we remained friends for the rest of our lives. And Joe and I both had an opportunity to eulogize the senator. It's one of the great honors of my life.
I agree.
So that is why I'm here. And while I'll be there whenever Joe asks anything, because he has been a great supporter of American values and of the American importance. Now, I lived in a but I was born in a democratic Germany, and then in the Nazi Germany as a member of a discriminated minority. And to me, America, about which I knew nothing, except that it was a symbol of freedom to me. And I was a great admirer of President Roosevelt, of whom I also knew nothing because the German press didn't report it, except that it was the president of the country to which my family had the good fortune to emigrate as a group. And while many members of our family, extended family, were sacrificed, we came as a group to the United States. So Joe and I don't agree in detail about how this commitment to democracy can be exercised. But I've admired him. I respect what he has done. And you should assess what I may say in the rest of this discussion in terms of what I've just said about Senator McCain, Joe, and myself. So Joe, let's go ahead along the lines of that you outlined.
Thanks, Henry. And I really appreciate your tribute to John, which I know comes from your heart, and I thank you for it. So we're at a point again, and you bring a lot of personal history to it, where effectively managing our relationship with China is a critical element of our foreign policy. And one of the more challenging aspects goes right to the heart of the theme for the Sedona conference, which is defending democracy. And really, just last month, Secretary of State Blinken met with China's Foreign Minister Yang in Anchorage, and the differences about democracy and human rights came right to the surface. Blinken said, I want to quote him, that China was threatening the rules-based order that maintains global stability. And Yang said the U.S. had to, quote, stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world. And of course, on Capitol Hill and in this administration, the Biden administration, there's a lot of concern about Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs, about its dominance of Hong Kong. And yet we all know that there's a desire to figure out how to manage our relationship with China in a way that's mutually beneficial and does not break into open military conflict. So how do we bring all that together, Henry? How do we remain in any way true to our values, which McCain and I and you have experienced, of freedom and human rights, and still manage to live successfully in the world with a rising China?
My views in terms of how it began, to which you so kindly referred in your opening comments. When I was security advisor to President Nixon, the United States had no diplomatic contact with China or any contact with China for 25 years. And Mao was the leading figure in China. And we were aware of dramatic upheavals that had been taking place in China with great human suffering. But at the same time, the principal threat to the United States was the Soviet Union. It was the only other country that had nuclear weapons of any magnitude, and it was developing its military capacities at a threatening rate, and it was actually engaging in threats over Berlin and other key issues for the entire period up to then of the Cold War. An additional challenge we had was the Vietnam War, which, when I say we, the Nixon administration inherited, with 500,000 American troops located in Vietnam, as far away from America as you can be geographically, and in a political environment for which we were not prepared historically. So, but in America, the domestic opinion was obsessed with the Vietnam War. So we had two objectives. One, to show to the American public that its government had a vision greater than the Vietnam War, that it had a vision of some kind of world order in which these upheavals could be avoided. And secondly, we had a strategic problem, which is to put the Soviet Union under pressure from our diplomacy. So this is why we opened to China on the basis of substantial strategic considerations. And I had the honor of being the first American diplomatic visitor to China. And this is how the relationship began. And then, as Secretary of State, my instructions to my people was be sure to place America in a position in which we were closer to both China and Russia than they were to each other. That was sort of the basic strategy then. I'm talking about 60 years ago. Now, then in 1976, 5 years after the opening to China, the trade with China was less than the trade with the Central American country Honduras. There was next to no trade. Then in the next decades, that trade developed. There was the uprising in Tiananmen Square. And at that point, still the economic relations with China were minimal. And I believe the basic policy continued to focus on the strategic aspects. Then in the Clinton administration, it began at first with trying to include significant human rights element. And that did not get anywhere. So they went back to the view that the strategic relationship was first, and to the hope that a growing economic relationship would produce more significant economic, political compatibility. So today we're in a situation where China has an explicit political system which is not, which is based on a degree of central leadership, which is not parallel to what we believe to be the correct political system.
Right.
So our question is, and the question you asked me, is it possible? What is the issue today? I think we have an elemental issue and a long-term issue. I would define the elemental issue as follows: that for the first time in human history, humanity has capacity to extinguish itself in a finite period of time. We have developed a technology of a power that is beyond what anybody imagined even 70 years ago. And so that was the nuclear issue. And now to the nuclear issue is added the high-tech issue, in which in the field of artificial intelligence is in its essence based on the fact that man becomes a partner of machines, and that machines can develop their own judgment. So in such a world, a military conflict between high-tech powers is of colossal importance, significance. So on the one hand, it should be avoided. must be avoided. But on the other hand, we must maintain the convictions that made America great, and that I experienced in my youth their significance to oppressed people around the world. So how can we combine these two?
Right.
And that's with respect to the first, I believe we must be in constant dialogue with China. But with respect to the second, we must always affirm our principles. And we must not sacrifice them to simply tactical considerations. That's a very hard road to go. Because in the United States, when you have constant negotiations, which is what I believe is necessary, the public then thinks there is no strategic problem. And then you may weaken yourself by neglecting defense. And when you neglect defense, you then invite other countries to assert their mounting competitive strength. So how is it possible to maintain a strategic posture and at the same time get into a conceptual dialogue with the, say, Chinese in this case, in which the Chinese are brought to understand what our red lines are and to respect them, but where at the same time we negotiate avoidable conflicts and, where possible, cooperative efforts. This is the complex task we have. Nobody has yet succeeded in doing it completely, because we usually err on one side or the other. But that is the essence of the relationship. That's the challenge the administration now has. I think Alaska was a good example of that, because it's not usual that in the opening statement of a diplomatic conference stresses all the disagreements. But it also has the advantage of showing where we are and what we need to do. So it's the biggest problem for America, the biggest problem for the world, because if we can't solve that, then the risk is that all over the world, a kind of Cold War will develop between China and the United States. And in the Cold War with the Soviet Union had no economic capacity, and they had a military technological capacity, but it didn't have an elemental technological capacity as China does. But China is a huge economic power, in addition to being a significant military power. So it is a very challenging task for America. And it's important that we unite on that and don't divide ourselves into one group that is in favor of the moral aspect and another one that's in favor of the strategic aspect. The two have to be linked. Oh, that's a long answer.
No, that was an excellent statement. Very, I think, realistically balanced and very wise. And I think you were faithful to our national values, but also made clear how much is at stake in managing this relationship in a way that doesn't break into open conflict, and to continue to talk to the Chinese. I arrived in the Senate in the late 80s, and I was right at the middle of the discussions about China during the Clinton administration, in which the president and the administration really fought to include China in the global, integrate China into the global economy, both for mutual economic benefit, but also, as you said, Henry, with the hope that it would create a more democratic China. So the fact that it has not created a more democratic China has today led some people to want to break away from the economic relationship. And I'm sure you agree that the economic relationship and the integration of China has not only been good for the Chinese, but it's also been very beneficial for us. And it's certainly the fact that it has not led to as much democracy as we hoped it would within China should not lead us to walk away from what you've described as a necessity of constant dialogue. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask you a question that is really much more strategic than about democracy. One of the things that you did brilliantly in the early 70s in opening our relationship with China was to work within the context of the tension between the Soviet Union and China, and to form both a strong Sino-American alliance out of that, but also to maintain a pretty decent U.S.-Soviet détente. Today, it appears that the Soviet Union, well, Russia and China, President Putin and President Xi are coming closer and closer together. And I wanted to ask you to reflect on how that may complicate America's desire to improve and peacefully manage our relationship with China.
Well, if China and the United States, if China and the Soviet Union are united strategically and politically, that creates not only a very large concentration of population, but also a geography that covers 3/4 of Eurasia, and therefore has a tremendous impact. And then to the extent that the United States, as it must, favors the peaceful solution of disputes and restraint in the use of pressures, that is a combination that is very unfortunate for this objective. And it existed in a way when we opened to China, except that at that time China was the junior partner of that extended relationship, while today it's the reverse. China has a large economy, huge population, but Russia is still a significant nuclear military power and has a population that's shrinking, but still very significant. So it cannot be in the American interest to drive the two sides together. And in terms of the historical experience, some of a significant part of the current Chinese Russian territory from China in the 19th century. So the national interests of those two countries have not in the past always coincided.
Right.
So for all of these reasons, if everything else could be worked out properly, it's not in our interest to force these two countries together and to develop a distinct policy for each of them in the United States that gives us a chance to permit each side to consider its own long-term interests. We have not had any diplomacy with Russia now for partly because of acts that the Soviets or that the Russians undertook with respect to the Ukraine and other neighboring countries. And those acts derive from the fact that in the mind of Russians, Ukraine has always been part of the Russian Empire, so that the mere fact of breaking loose is considered a chance. So Ukraine is absolutely entitled to its independence, and the United States properly supports that. But we have not explored the possibilities of conversations with Russia for several decades now, for at least a decade and a half, because the dangers that I described before affect Russia as well. And so I am not saying that diplomacy will always lead to beneficial results, but I am saying that if we are forced into confrontations, which we must be prepared to be in defense of our values, that we can say to ourselves that we've made every effort to achieve peaceful outcomes compatible with our values. And that effort has not thrived with Russia in recent years, importantly because of their actions, but also partly because of our domestic politics.
Yes, I agree. That's a great agenda, really, a challenge to this administration and I'm quite taken with it, not only to continue the dialogue with China, but to try to restart in an honest way a dialogue that hasn't existed for quite a while with Russia. And it's in our interest to not have them unite with each other and in that sense against us. So, Henry, I'm afraid we've used our time. We could go on for hours. You're a real inspiration. Really, it's a blessing that you continue to be as not only able, but willing to share the lessons of your extraordinary life. And you're just a source of great wisdom for a lot of us. And I can't thank you enough. Again, on behalf of the memory of John McCain and specifically Cindy McCain and the McCain Institute, thanks for all that you brought to this discussion today. And, I pray that God will bless you and your family with only good things for a lot more years to come.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Be well. See you soon.